Hello team, welcome back to another Line Warcast. This is your map today. A mix of water and land. 3v3 of course, the two teams on Alpha Team, Taranto in blue, someone said that my nickname sucks in red, and Prototype Shark in orange. And on Bravo Team, Sergio in teal, Viking 69 in pink, and Ehot in green. Open question as to how much a Navy is going to come into play here. I think both teams could probably just use ground forces exclusively, and it's still a valid strat. Someone said that my nickname sucks in red, going for 3 factories right away, and a barracks. Triple airport from Taranto is what we're hearing with those noises, and a refinery immediately. Factory, 3 factory and a barracks for Prototype, and this is really bad for Sergio. It's going to be a precarious situation rather, because Sergio is off in the far left and totally on their own. I guess Ehot is actually the bottom, so the two players on Bravo Team in a very interesting position against Prototype Shark and of course Nickname, both on Alpha Team across here. Town quickly for Sergio after these 3 factories, slowly pushing forward and trying to snipe this one barracks. Ehot's going 3 factories with the town and capping on the rest of it. Ehot's obviously going to get into a little bit of a fight with Nickname. Prototype digging in the mountains here. The first artillery piece is out for Teal, so they can start shelling away at this defensive line, and the first artillery piece for Prototype is getting into the fight slowly. There's still one more player that we haven't introduced, and of course it's Viking 69 in the far right. 2 factories, 2 docks, transport boat up immediately. We'll see how quick Viking decides to go across to this landmass, if that's in fact what the transport boat is intended for. And these Teal infantry are going to get by this defensive line and get on top of this barracks and very likely destroy it before Orange can really respond all that quickly. Airstrip already for Prototype, and the little flag indicates that the team sharing is on, and that's likely going to be for Taranto's 3 airports to reinforce this spot. Because in the same way that it's actually, like, it's a relatively precarious position for Sergio, it's definitely a precarious position for Prototype as well. Just because of how close these 2 players are. 4th factory for Teal, who takes out the first barracks and continues to push forward, is actually just going to target this other factory. I don't think this one's going to go down with this one artillery piece for Orange behind that factory continuously attacking. And we can see that Ehot is starting to open up a second front on Orange, who has 2 factories in the back here. This mountain range could be a very good defensive position because it's going to take a while for Sergio to get through this mountain, especially if Orange digs in at some point. And for Ehot, this push from Nickname is going to do a lot of damage. Nickname doesn't necessarily have to push forces to the right. They can focus exclusively to the left and pressure Ehot. Cruiser and more transport boats for Viking, getting pestered by some strikers for Taranto, who I assume the strikers for Taranto are going to start helping out on the left-hand side potentially, especially if these infantry of Ehot that are on just a move command just try to sprint by all these units and get on top of the production. If these actually start doing a lot of damage, the planes become even more important. We see that Taranto's starting to send the planes out now. This other factory for Prototype in the west is likely going to go down at some point, just because there's 4 factories now for Sergio. It might be Sergo, and also I apologize if I'm pronouncing the names wrong. This many infantry trying to click on this barracks with the strikers showing up at just like the perfect moment. There's a chance that this factory won't fall. Great timing on these 2 artillery pieces for Orange to show up, because they're going to be able to start shelling away at these infantry. And I suspect that won't go down. Nickname's dropping in like a bunch of artillery at this point from that 3 factory start. This whole army is going to put a lot of pressure on Ehot. Far right, we have to keep checking. Vikings going across now to this main landmass that Nickname is on with 2 SAMs, a 3rd one just out. It's a decent number of SAMs to deal with the planes that are left over here from blue, because there's really only 2 strikers over here at this point. Barracks for Taranto that might indicate that there's commando drops potentially on the way. And unfortunately for Sergio, the targeting on this building means that these artillery are going to just totally ignore the orange artillery that's firing at them and wait until they get into the range of the factory and then start attacking the factory. But you can see the teal artillery just falls super quickly. Didn't even really realize, I mean, these two artillery pieces for EHOT have actually encircled this factory. Factory's definitely gonna go down. It's just a matter of time. Great dig in from Prototype here, and Nickname's push begins in earnest at this point. It's a very long defense line for EHOT, which in general could be good, but it's just that there's not enough units necessarily to fill this yet. So as these artillery pieces try to get into this defensive line and dig in and entrench, Red's artillery gets free shots this entire time, which is tough. So I'd expect Nickname to slowly start breaking through. Nickname's going for some SAMs at this point, and Viking is on this main landmass with 2 missile boats, a cruiser, and actually a 3rd missile boat. Gas-wise, Viking's going to have to get this refinery set up to keep this navy going. The factory does go down for Prototype. Sergio's following this up with some industry, which I think is a good call. The industry in the mountains actually will take 50% longer to build with this. I guess it doesn't say it here, but if you actually have it, if you try to build an industry and you hover over it, it should say 50% extra build time, anything in forests and mountains. So this is, none of the artillery for Red has gone down at this point. It's a very scary push, and EHOT's not really going to get much support, because by the time Sergio gets down here, there's going to be it'll be very close, like a tight race to see if they can get down to support EHOT defending the production before Nickname does a lot of damage, potentially game-ending damage for EHOT. So Viking must have one of these territories capped, continuing to cap in the Far East. And 1 full airport of strikers at this point. And they're going to start transferring to this airstrip is what's happening. So good air support from Taranto. And these strikers are going to be very good because they can also reach down here in the south to help out Nickname as well in this push. Nickname's going for a dock here. I wonder what sort of boat is going to come out of this. Potentially missile boats, but more likely even cruisers here in this little bay. I mean, they can, cruisers could hit these land units and start softening them up for this big push. And just Nickname is continuing to filter units to the left and also capping to the right. Viking and Nickname are going to get in a little bit of a tussle at some point over all that territory on the far east of the map. And I think this is a plane move, so these planes are going to try to go around the outside to get on top of all this production and go around this army. There's 3 SAMs already for Sergio, which 3 SAMs against 5 strikers is a decent amount. Here comes 3 tanks from EHOT with the aim to get around this defensive line and get on top of the production. It's going to take a lot of damage from these artillery pieces, and I suspect with 5 strikers, they should be able to clean it up, but I've definitely misjudged tanks before. They have a lot of health, obviously, as a tank. For some reason, I always get fooled by it and assume they're going to get cleaned up, and they ultimately survive. Huge navy from Viking, who is out of gas, still dealing with that energy problem. The 3 tanks do, in fact, get cleaned up. And some reinforcements from Sergio to come help EHOT, who is dug in like the perfect location here, I think. In the direct route between Nickname and these production facilities. Nickname is now digging in. Nickname, I think, would know that, like, there's still a bunch of economy to cap in the far right side of the map, so there's no urgent need for Nickname to just push into this defensive line. Nickname in the south is going to go around this thing. This is another avenue of attack to come from the south of these production buildings. And it'll be interesting to see if EHOT also decides to give up this barracks and then dig in defensively. Relatively static front here. These 4 factories. For Sergio still pumping out units. Let's see what these 5 strikers can do when they take this northern approach. And with all these SAMs, there's tons and tons of SAMs here for Vikings, so there's no possible way that Taranto's going to be able to send planes over anymore. With how close these two airports are to the shore, cruisers definitely could hit these two things. So I wonder if Vikings going to be able to get boats in position to start trying to destroy those airports. One striker unfortunately takes the direct route. These three strikers got around back. They're going to be able to kill this SAM relatively quickly. And now they're on top of all this production. There's 3 artillery pieces on the way, so it's not like any SAMs are going to pop all that quickly. And I wonder if Surge is going to pull the SAMs back to deal with this. With only 4 planes, it's not like they're going to kill a building necessarily. But there's now 2 airstrips over here, so Taranto next time will be able to send like twice as many planes essentially. Nickname's making great progress here. Still a relatively large artillery army. I like that EHOT is putting down a 4th factory. And another dock here for Nickname, who's putting down their own airstrips so that Taranto can feed into this, presumably. Taranto's going for a great approach on this refinery. I assume the refinery is the intended target here. The planes are going to get hit by these SAMs, though. They're going to go a little bit inland and likely like run over these SAMs because they're on an attack move, so they're gonna generally like proc to the SAMs instead of the buildings. And the first little skirmishes of infantry between Nickname and Viking. Nickname, of course, has a little bit of an advantage because there's actually producing structures on this landmass, whereas Viking needs to keep reinforcing off of these production facilities on their starting little island. Let's see how these strikers do. They're actually going to hit the dock, but then they do go to the SAMs. One of them is going to go down. And something that usually, or sometimes happens for me, at least when I'm running planes, is if I see a bunch of SAMs like that, I immediately panic and just destroy it, like delete this line command to stop anything else from going and send all the planes home. But when that happens, the planes will take the most direct route. And sometimes I'll fly over the SAMs unintentionally. Relatively decent from Taranto, I think. I mean, it's still 3 airports, so they can remax those airplanes relatively quickly. EHOT, part of me, is chasing this army of Nickname down. And Nickname's now got a full defensive line. There's no way that EHOT's going to be able to push Nickname for the next little bit without an overwhelming artillery force. Lots of infantry for Red on the right-hand side, really locking this down. 2 odd-numbered fights here that Nickname is going to win. Both of them. And Viking with all these missile boats can really position these things. They're going to have to fight Nickname's navy. But if Viking can win this fight and then start positioning missile boats all throughout this little bay, it will make it a little bit more difficult for Taranto to just run these planes around and move them around to all these different airstrips that the Allies have built. Artillery on artillery action, part of me, with the strikers providing support. The SAMs are a little bit late. They're going to get at least 1 plane. And there you go. Maybe even the second one. 3 SAMs hit it. It's okay. Great play from Prototype to snipe this town. And this army of Nickname is getting surrounded from all this capping infantry for EHOT. And the other infantry, or the other artillery, showing up just in time. 3rd dock now for Nickname. Viking's still out of gas, which is super painful. Because Viking does have way more boats. And could take this fight against Nickname if these boats could actually move. Town and 3 industry for Viking, which I like. There's a lot of economy there. And it's even more important that Viking get that if they can't secure the far east of the map, which we've seen down here. I don't think the situation has changed, and it hasn't. Viking's now going to try to move some of the boats in to hit these cruisers for Nickname. Cruisers being the best, like, pound-for-pound unit on water when it comes down to naval engagements. And I wonder what EHOT is going to do with this army now that this has been cleaned up. Maybe try to push through the bottom side of this choke. Nickname backing up with the cruisers because Vikings in pursuit with a much larger navy. And second refinery or more power plants for Viking is, I think, going to be a deciding factor for whether this navy succeeds or not. Navies take a lot of gas, a lot of energy, pardon me, to run. And keeping on top of that is very important. Taranto's got some planes here softening up this artillery line. It's enough SAMs for Nickname, who likely will be able to start just producing pure artillery once there's enough anti-air. A Nickname's still building 3 cruisers at a time, so over time, Nickname will have more boats. Viking's still just on two docks, and there are some missile boats with it. So very slowly the Navy strength for Red is going to surpass, pardon me, that of Pink. It's important that Nickname maintains this naval supremacy, or rather gains this naval supremacy, because of how close this refinery is for Taranto to the water. Because of course Vikings boats could just pull up here and start destroying it if the Navy could win here in the south. I don't think they're going to, because it's 3 cruisers against 1 cruiser and 4 missile boats. I'm pretty sure Red wins this fight. The planes are still going to try to do another run around north. There's now 4 SAMs in position. They're slowly moving out of position. So let's see if this works out for Taranto. And I'm not sure if so it's just a defensive line here for EHOT. There's no indication that this is actually going to be a push. Taranto's planes are going to be able to do a lot of damage until there's actually SAMs here for green. There's 1 in the forest, but it's not really enough to deal with 5 planes. 5th factory now for EHOT. And Nickname has cleaned up this navy. And that's great news for Alpha Team. Viking still has some territories down here. I'm not really sure if it makes sense to build a proxy base just because of how many infantry that Nickname has prowling through all those territories, because they would find it likely before any barracks produced a unit. An industry for EHOT behind this, which I do like. These strikers are just having a field day, really, without any SAMs for green. The strikers were able to destroy something. They definitely damaged a bunch of buildings. They take a lot of fire on the way out to get back to base. And we can see that this town is being targeted, so these strikers, once they land and ready to go, they're likely going to just beeline right towards that town. Nickname now has 4 cruisers out. They're slowly getting into position and retaking this energy welled water territory, which could come into play because of just how much gas now Nickname is going to be consuming off of this cruiser heavy navy. 2 sub-pens for Nickname as well that could, if Vikings Navy moves away from the docks too much, the submarines could just roll in here and destroy the refinery and the two docks, which would be devastating. This town is going to live because the strikers aren't going to be able to reach it without taking a bunch of SAM fire. And we can see exactly what's happening here. This front line is going to just turn to a little bit of a stalemate. So is this one, and I was just about to say, who's going to make the rocket first? So Nickname is building the rocket here. It's actually in great position because it can also attack Sergio's army in these defensive lines, while also being able to target this main forest army of EHOT. This town is certainly going down against this many strikers. There's no SAMs around it. An overwhelming number of planes. It's still 3 airport striker from Taranto, so constant reinforcements. Big naval battle between Pink and Red. Pink going for a city at this point. Tons of SAMs at home. And Nickname's entirely cleaned up this right-hand side of the map. The first sub is out. The first 2 subs, rather, are out. And these subs are going to be able to take out these transport boats. This is one of the things that subs are really built for, is disrupting enemies' transport boats. Nickname's on top of it, moving the subs into position. Taranto's slowly starting to soften up this defensive line. And as long as there's no SAMs and none of these strikers die, this is always super valuable for blue to be doing this. City for EHOT. Great call. We see the importance of economy in team games because all players have less land territories that they can cap for their income, so they have to supplement it with economy buildings. Taranto's got a town in the north. And these transport boats are super banged up. If they get to the landmass once more, like one more time, pardon me, they're definitely not going to be able to get back again. Nickname likely has a very large economy. 3 docks still just pumping out cruisers. And the rocket is now on the stand. So I think generally a rocket takes, it's like 7 minutes or something to build. So there's a timer now in this game for Bravo team in some sense. If they can't find that rocket and destroy it. SAM's taking on the strikers. SAMs are just so deadly. When they do their little machine gun noise, that's actually when they do their most DPS. The firecrackers going to work. They get 2 more planes here. And I suspect if Nickname just rockets this part of the map, destroys this entire army and the defensive lines, then Nickname will just push with every unit through EHOT space, and then, I mean, it will be a very compromising position, pardon me, for Sergio. Because now there's definitely 2 fronts that are opened against Orange. 7 cruisers against pretty much no boats anymore for Viking. This is really bad news for Viking. And I don't suspect there's any way that Viking's going to be able to keep these docks and the refinery up. Just because of how many cruisers there are. Artillery will do okay. It's not dug into entrenchments. Which would be the best thing so that they have more survivability against these cruisers. And these 3 subs have destroyed the last of the transport boats. So there's no real way for Viking to get across here in the south to start trying to cap. Rocket is 1/3 of the way done. And the city just finishes for EHOT. Sergio seems to think now's the time to go, trying to break through on this western side of the defensive line. And at the same time, Prototype's actually going to go for a push here. Another airport for Taranto, that's the 4th one. We can see just how much damage these cruisers are doing. Submarines taking on missile boats directly, getting shelled by artillery pieces. And so many planes now for Taranto. So with Nickname destroying a lot of these SAMs and pulling these SAMs out of position, there's so many SAMs in reserve, but it's not entirely unreasonable for Alpha Team to think that there wouldn't be that many SAMs left here. The energy is certainly going to go down. I suspect at least some of these strikers are going to hit it, and they do. Let's see how many of them actually fall to all these SAMs. It's like almost 4 full dots of SAMs here, so that's a lot of damage these planes take, but I think it's generally worth it to get rid of that gas. Need to make sure we don't miss this rocket, since we always miss these rockets in this series. It's nearly done. Once this little arm stops moving, then that'll indicate that Nickname could fire it, so let's just go big picture here. See Nickname's cruisers in the top right still doing work. 3 cruisers now chilling outside the base of Viking, and really just waiting to hit this dock. 2 transport boats now. It's transport boat production out of these far right docks for Nickname, which really indicates that Nickname's getting geared up to do an invasion on Viking's landmass. And we just patiently wait for this rocket. An enormous artillery army for Prototype, who might just be able to push on Sergio's base without any help from a rocket. Sergio's making good progress through this northern little part of the map, or the west part of the defensive line. And unless these SAMs can pull off a miracle, which they can't. Luckily for EHOT, none of the units actually really perish in the rocket blast. One of the factories does, so EHOT's back to 3 factories. Really great push from Sergio, because if Sergio can get around this, there's maybe some promise. There's a decent amount of SAMs here to protect this artillery army. It's this thrust from Prototype that is likely causing Sergio a little bit of panic here, or a little bit of worry. Sergio has their own strikers at this point, but there's no gas to really run these things. And unfortunately for EHOT, they can't send Sergio any gas because there's no refineries in general that Bravo Team own over here. Transport jets, so looking for some commando drops, which could be devastating. There's not that many garrisoned units back here for Nickname on the refinery specifically. And here comes Nickname's drop. The landing is about to happen. Luckily for Viking, there's a bunch of commandos here ready to receive these infantry from Red. And Cruz is still doing a bunch of damage. We can see that the docks are totally dead now for Viking, who's building some power plants to get some sort of gas income. Helicopter's pretty decent choice. It's gonna just be, I think until Nickname builds missile boats, that's gonna work. Cruisers will do decent against helicopters, so in the numbers that Nickname has of Red cruisers over in the top right, maybe one airport of helicopters isn't gonna be able to really do that much damage. We'll have to see. Taranto really wants to kill this airport. And the second rocket always hits quicker than the first. So it's almost 2/3 of the way done here. The second rocket likely is going to try to destroy a bunch of units for EHOT. Submarine now for Viking. 3 subs. It's 1 sub pen against Nickname's 2 sub pens. So maybe with some good luck and great micro with these subs, Viking can find a way to buy some time. Still an enormous artillery army. Luckily for Sergio, the airport doesn't go down, but we can see by the black plumes of smoke coming from these strikers that there's no energy for Sergio to actually run these things. Good adjustment from Prototype to rebuild this defensive line in a better position to deal with this artillery army from Sergio. And Taranto keeps clicking on buildings to target them, which is great. I mean, if the strikers can get through and not run into the SAMs, they're going to be able to kill these buildings relatively quickly. Rocket is nearly done for Nickname, who has repositioned these transport boats over here, so potentially an impending invasion from Nickname to go around this defensive line. And Taranto is in fact doing some commando drops, using these commandos and transport planes. The rocket is done, it's ready to go. Viking is totally isolated now in the top right, with no navy to speak of. Industry goes down for Sergio, cutting back on some of that eco. And still only 3 SAMs in the forest for EHOT. And this many strikers likely could even just destroy 3 SAMs on their own. Airport finally goes down. That's a big loss for Sergio, unfortunately, because there were a bunch of strikers on that airport. And if the strikers are landed, or if the planes in general are landed on the airport when it's destroyed, it just means that the planes are destroyed alongside it. Still want to make sure we don't lose track of this rocket. And a quick check of what's being built. It's still strikers from Taranto, who at this point can start sending some over to the right-hand side, which is what we're seeing. The commandos actually do land on this city. They might be able to snipe it. And the second rocket is launched from Nickname. It looks like Prototype Shark is going to be able to hold on. And we'll see in a second if Nickname is going to start pushing or it's just going to go right at the city. Great rocket and sets up a big push from Nickname through the center. And the SAMs did great to protect these artillery, but just over time when they run into this defensive line, the defensive line artillery is going to have a range bonus against the non-defensive line artillery for Sergio, and they're also going to have a little bit of a defensive buff against their artillery attacks, which is important. Vikings definitely in a tough situation to hold at this point, has to deal with both blue and red. Nickname's got a town with a port on the way. If Alpha Team can get this port set up, then that's a trade route and it's a lot of income. And 4 infantry now, for Nickname, are actually on Vikings landmass. And yeah, that does make a lot of sense, unfortunately, for Bravo Team. Vikings out, EHOT resigns, which just leaves Sergio on the left-hand side. And Alpha Team would just be able to, at this point, capture all the territory and very slowly overwhelm Sergio. Nickname would be able to start sending the rocket up against Sergio's forces. Well played. Good game. Let's get to the graphs. Let's check out what the energy was. Yeah, both teams did pretty decent overall to make sure they had the energy to move all those boats. Very cool game. Folks, if you want to learn more about Line War, check out the Line War Discord. You can ask questions there, learn more, just chat with folks, hang out, check out Twitch. Some folks stream on Twitch, I do as well. Soda Quackers, same name as on YouTube. Have a great evening, day, night, breakfast, lunch, dinner, whatever it is. We'll see you soon. Peace.